Greg, in trying to discern whether God exists, we have all these arguments that people have used over time, and they're interesting, whether there's a first cause, a first mover, a designer of the universe, some greatest possible being, the argument that the universe is intelligible, or we have morality, all these things, all these arguments. Which do you like?
Well, Robert, as a philosopher, I like them all, even the ones that aren't very good, because they're so interesting. And often we learn more from an argument that goes badly than we do from one that might be strong. Now, which arguments do I think are the strongest of the arguments? I actually think the cosmological argument is fairly strong.
That there's a first cause or first mover.
That there's a first cause and there's first mover. And we have to remember that these arguments for the existence of God have two parts. They have from the universe to a first cause, and then from the first cause to something like God. So let's talk about the first part of the argument.
So it's like an existence and then an identification.
Then an identification.
Yeah. What is that you're talking about?
Why should we think the first cause is God? And it's very rarely observed that Aquinas will give one of his first cause arguments in about 2 paragraphs, but he spent 300 pages on the second part of the argument because it can be very complicated. But the cosmological argument says that if things are contingent or if they come into existence, then they're caused to exist by something else. Nothing can cause itself to come into existence. And I think very quickly we get into 3 choices for the universe. Either it always existed, or it came into existence with absolutely no cause, or it was caused to exist by something else. We have good reason to think it didn't always exist. Some of these are philosophical arguments, and then, of course, Big Bang cosmology and the second law of thermodynamics.
There are arguments there now with multiple universes and endless cycles. I mean, we can go on and on. But
that's right.
I think those 3 points are fairly exhaustive as to the possibility.
And I think, as a philosopher, I cannot rule out decisively that the universe came into existence with no cause. But it does seem less likely than it was caused to exist by something else. Because events of that magnitude, at least any events we know anything about, tend to be caused. It's not that every event is caused, because we know from quantum mechanics that there are uncaused events.
Okay, now I know that you think that the cosmological argument, the first cause, is a good one.
Yes.
Not 100%, it's not
Right.
you're not basing your faith on, but it's a good argument. Now tell me one of the bad ones. One of the ones that other people believe in God that you would throw out the window.
Well, the original design argument, I think, is no longer very strong. The one that Paley is famous for putting forward, and it's the argument, the Watchmaker argument. And then he argues that things like the human eye resemble a watchmaker, resemble a watch, and if we find a watch, we infer that it was made because the parts are intricate. And I think neo-Darwinism, even Darwinism before neo-Darwinism, is fundamentally an objection to that argument. Now, it doesn't argue that God didn't design us, but our reason for thinking that there's a designer based on the human eye has been severely undercut. Here we have a perfectly plausible story of how the human eye and other things could come to look designed when they're not designed. Mm-hmm. Not only is it a plausible story, but there is significant evidence that this is the way things happen. So that kind of design argument, I believe, really
now, you
has
could
no
say
power.
God designed the evolutionary process,
Sure.
but the point is you don't have to.
No, and that argument, the way it was stated, I think is done. You can try to bring in another version.
Okay. All right, so now we have a good argument in the first cause and a bad argument in the design. What else can you put in these categories? Give me some other arguments that you like and you don't like.
I think the fine-tuning argument, which is a different kind of design argument, is actually pretty strong. Because Darwinism only works on living things. And the fine-tuning argument has to do with the conditions surrounding the Big Bang singularity that were absolutely necessary to achieve any kind of interesting universe. And these have to do with the constants of various equations that
so now we have a new kind of design argument based on cosmological or physics forces as opposed to Darwinian design that was the original. Okay.
I think that can be a strong argument.
Okay, what's another bad one?
I think I don't think the other classical arguments are so bad. There are versions of the ontological argument that are bad. And this is the version that says God is the most perfect being.
Therefore, God must exist.
Therefore, God must exist.
Exist is a perfection.
Because existence is a perfection. What's interesting is Anselm, who originated this argument, actually gives two versions of the argument in the same paragraph, one of which is this bad one. And then the other one is where he talks about necessary existence being a perfection. And that's a much stronger argument.
Yeah. How about the argument from religious experience, that people have this religious experience, therefore they think God exists?
I think the religious experience argument is very strong in terms of being persuasive to people who have religious experience.
I'm talking about reality. I don't care
Yes.
about whether it persuades you or not. I'm talking about in terms of a linkage to the fundamental grounds of being.
But from a first-person perspective, that it can be convincing. I think from a second-person perspective, it's far less convincing. I think it's very hard to persuade someone that God might be real based on my experience of God. So there are good arguments, and then there are arguments that aren't so good.